Please like and comment below and subscribe and share for more first-person encounters.
The Massanutten Mountain abduction. My family and I spent Thanksgiving with my wife's mother, Lynn Huff, in Massanutten, Virginia, a ski resort located in the Blue Ridge Mountains near Harrisonburg. I discovered while there a past history of abductions in that community, one of which resulted in the death of my wife's brother Bobby in 1980, by doctors administering a tranquilizer following his Travis Walton type abduction. He had a fatal allergic reaction to the drug. Ironically, Lynn lives on Hopkins Lane. I was preoccupied with going to Skytop Overlook at the top of the ridge overlooking the ski resort and valley to the east. I wanted to go there around 8 p.m. and look for unusual lights in the sky. My wife, Pat, wanted to come along. We drove our van up the switchback road to the parking lot near the top of the ridge and parked at the opposite end of the parking lot from the entrance, looking out over the valley below. There was one vehicle parked there. I set up my camera and tripod in front of the van near the guardrail. A security patrol car, Chevy Caprice, arrived shortly after we arrived and then returned back down to the valley. The vehicle that was there when we arrived soon left also. I took a 2-minute exposure of the lights in the valley. The time was 8:18 p.m. Shortly after that, at about 8:28 p.m., a brilliant pair of lights entered the parking lot from the road that comes up the side of the mountain. At first the lights were diagonally behind the van. I recall hearing some sort of a humming sound, but no car engine sound. I thought, not another interruption. But this pair of lights illuminated the treetops next to the guardrail to my left, then illuminated the tree trunks, then the tree bases and guardrail. I turned to look at the lights. I felt a sharp pain in my left eye and quickly turned away because the lights were about 10 times the brightness of high beams on a car. I felt heat radiating from the lights through the window of the van. I saw 2 lights about 5 feet in diameter with auras of yellow and amber and diffuse rings around white centers. I also saw a dark dome behind the lights. After turning away, I had the thought in my head, "Don't look at the lights, look straight ahead." When I tried to turn again, I had great difficulty, as if I were paralyzed. I could only move my head slightly, although my eyes could move freely. My wife tried to turn to look at the light on the right side of the van, but also had difficulty in turning. It was bright enough that the light lit up the ground next to the van, catching her attention. She remembers the reflection of the light moving downwards towards the ground, i.e. getting brighter. She also remembers trying to look at her wristwatch. She recalls having difficulty in turning her wrist so that she could see her watch. When she finally could see the watch on her right wrist, it read 8:35 p.m. The next thing she remembered was being able to turn freely to the left to look out the left side window of the van. She saw a small vehicle moving out of the parking lot towards the road that goes back down the mountain. It was sleek and metallic colored and had unusual curves to its silhouette, with a dome, the top of which was made of dark reflective material like tinted glass, below which a tall skirt of metallic shiny gray metal completed the base of the dome. It had a low back that had a downward sagging shape to it, with a ring of small white lights that seemed to merge together, bordered above and below by dark metal ridges, and possibly 2 small red lights within the row of white lights, one at either side of the craft, that may have flashed briefly as do brake lights. The row of lights separated the dome and the metal base that was angled inwards on both sides, like an old cast iron cooking skillet, and colored a darker metallic shiny gray than the dome. The front pair of bright lights appeared to be directed straight ahead and away from us, not downwards as the craft pulled out of the parking lot. The beams of light widened with distance in front of the craft, and it appeared to move horizontally, not downwards, with the downward slope of the road, as if it were floating above the ground. There was at least a 1-foot gap between the base of the craft and crest of the road pavement before the road sloped downwards at the parking lot entrance. There were no apparent wheels visible underneath the craft. Pat thought it was a small car pulling out of the parking lot, but now thinks that this was a mental thought purposely given to confuse and distract her from recognizing that it was not. As the vehicle departed, my watch beeped, indicating that it was 9:00 p.m. After the lights entered the parking lot and I turned and glanced at them, they descended and dimmed to a brown amber color, then went out as the vehicle moved towards the guardrail about 15 to 20 feet from the left side of the van and touched down. I saw the lights move forward in the side view mirror, but could not turn my head for a better look as I had just done before. There was no sound coming from the craft. Then I heard the distinctive sound of gravel being moved as if something hard were pushing the gravel. A gravel apron of about 10 feet in width occurs between the guardrail and pavement. Upon returning Sunday morning after the storm on Saturday, I found ridges of gravel aligned parallel with the guardrail near the pavement. One prominent ridge was about a half-inch high and about 3 feet long. Other shorter and lower ridges occurred inside it, as if whatever landed skipped and then dug in. The ridges were too sharp and high to be caused by tires, and the area in front of the ridges had been planed flat. Soon after I heard the gravel move, I heard the door open, and then felt something hit the back of my neck hard, like a blow to the head. The next thing I knew, I was waking up from what seemed like a shallow sleep as if I had dozed off. Then I heard my watch beep. It is set to beep every hour on the hour. I thought it strange, because it seemed as though we had just taken the 2-minute time exposure at 8:18 p.m. I commented to my wife that it was 9:00 p.m. and that we should be leaving. She responded, "Yes, I'm for that." When I looked at my watch, it read 9:00:54 p.m. and yet it seemed as though I had just heard the beep. Soon thereafter we both seemed alert and commented to each other about how the past hour went so quickly. I asked my wife if she remembered the last half hour, and she said, "No." Then I began remembering what had transpired just before I blacked out. I had lost about 30 minutes and could not recall anything that had happened during the period of missing time. My wife had lost about 25 minutes from the time she was able to glance at her watch. The next morning my wife noticed a brown area, about 2 inches wide, on the left back of my neck where I had been hit, and commented that the intense light may have caused a tan on the left side of my face. It was redder. I looked at it in the mirror and saw a yellow rim around the brown area, and recognized it as a large bruise, similar to but larger than the one I had gotten before when shot with some sort of energy beam near Pine Bush in 1992. I checked my wife, but could find no similar mark on her. Later Pat noticed a small puncture mark on the inside bend of her arm near one of her veins, but not on it. The mark clearly did not intersect any visible vein, but seemed to go directly into the space next to a tendon. The mark was like that made by a needle, and a thin trail of dark blood was still visible within the needle path. She had gotten no shots recently that she can remember. The difficulty with her moving her arm to look at her watch may have been her resisting someone holding and turning her arm to give her a tranquilizer or to take a blood sample. Pat thinks that the thought of looking at her watch and seeing that it was 8:35 p.m. may have been put in her mind as a cover for what really happened to her arm. I went back to the parking lot at the overlook and measured distances, calculating that the craft had to be narrower than 30 feet in order to enter the parking lot from the road and to be able to maneuver sideways within the parking lot, which was 45 to 50 feet at its widest point. I estimate that the craft was about 20 feet wide at its base and 10 to 15 feet tall. I cannot recall how high off the ground it was when I saw the egg-shaped dome behind the lights. It apparently did not have legs, otherwise it would not have made the slightly curved ridges of gravel. There were no pod marks in the gravel. I may have photographed similar types of craft in Pine Bush. Some of those craft, particularly the scout craft, have 2 headlights mounted on either side of a triangular-shaped body, with a relatively flat bottom and dome-shaped area on top for the pilot. Estimates of the widths of the outer lights for 3 such craft, based on photographs of the lights near trees or in front of the moon, have given similar values between 15 and 20 feet. The light that Pat saw on the right side of the van appeared to be coming from above and from behind the van, not to the left side of the van where the craft we saw was positioned. It is difficult for us to understand how the light from that craft could have been so bright on the right side and lit up the ground, because the van should have blocked it. The one possibility, if we were abducted, is that another craft was hovering above us, and the smaller craft was used as a diversion and/or for 2 aliens to immobilize and sedate us. The small craft appeared too small to be the abduction craft, implying that there must have been a second larger ship very near and above us. At first I doubted that either my wife or I had been abducted. The amount of missing time seemed too short. However, Pat found a needle tracked with blood in it near the vein at her elbow and discovered that evening when she got undressed that her panties were torn at the waistband. I was knocked out, Pat wasn't, but remembers little of what transpired after I lost consciousness. I suspected that they were investigating me because of an implant in me that triggered one of their security detectors. That would explain why they seem to know when I arrive in Pine Bush, are able to find me in other areas, and frequently come out to entertain me with maneuvers for my camera. I don't think that my desire to look for UFOs at Skytop Overlook was incidental or accidental. On 29 May 1995, Pat and I were hypnotically regressed by Fred Max, a certified hypnotherapist who also regressed Betty Andreessen Luca of the Andreessen Affair, Puholski, 1995. We discovered that Pat had been abducted by bird-like aliens, who were very short and had faces that resembled the face of an owl. She was taken, floated, to the small shuttlecraft that had landed next to my side of the van, and then lifted in that shuttle up to the larger circular craft hovering above the van. The owl-like aliens did a standard gynecological examination on Pat and removed ova from her ovary. They also shined various colored lights into her eyes and recorded the emotional responses. I saw her being floated back down into her seat while I was being attended to in my seat by other owl-like aliens. My brain implants were accessed by a probe which entered my skull just below my ear canals. I was not taken aboard the craft. Several days later, the red points of probe entry were still oozing blood serum. On 11 December 1993, Pat, Niles, Robine, and I went to the winter solstice party being held at Ralph Fusatala's and Kathy Green's house in Morristown, New Jersey. Mr. Chili's, aka Pila Kilo Kilo, and Mr. Rourke of the Big Island in Hawaii were present as guests of David Hartman, a wellness counselor promotional agent from Madison, New Jersey. Pila gave his story of being abducted at an early age and having an implant behind his right ear discovered and removed by his doctor. Later he got another implant and had it surgically removed, but before they could photograph it, it self-destructed into a gas and stain with a bubbling reaction, he said. He was emotionally upset about being victimized without his permission and said that had the extraterrestrials asked him and said it was for a higher purpose, he would have consented. When reading Communion, he became sick when he got to the part about the implant Whitley Strieber described behind his ear. Kathy wanted Pila and Nancy Weber to view our auras to see if there was anything unusual. The room was darkened somewhat, and Pat and I sat against a white wall. Viewed from across the room, both Pila and Nancy noticed exceptional aural development and colors around both of us, blues and greens. Pila said he had never seen such a pronounced aura on anyone. They both noticed and described an elongated cone-shaped distortion to our auras in the same places, originating from just below our right ears and extending upwards and outwards as a disjunction or disturbance in our auras. They concluded that something physical within us was causing this interference, suggesting that it might be due to an implant. We could feel no implant outside our skulls, indicating that whatever it was within our skulls. There were no initial indications of recent or past scars at the places where this disturbance originated on either of us, but later a tiny blood scab appeared just to the left side of my ear canal and continued to reappear after I removed the earlier ones. Pila remarked, and seconded by Nancy, that we had something special happening to us. I could see a slight aura around Pila, but not as colorful or pronounced as the one he described around Pat and me. He was very interested in learning about my UFO photographs and experiences. Bruce Cornett.
This is Lon Stricker. If you like this program, it would help us if you would give it a thumbs up. Then subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notification when we upload new first-person encounters. We have many more to come very soon. And by the way, if you have a suggestion or an experience of your own, please leave a comment.